Hey everybody. Today I was going to show you guys some new theory that I found in the Scotch Gambit for Black, but Lichess has temporarily disabled their studies feature due to some server issue, so that will have to wait for another day. Instead, I'm going to show you a recent classical game that I played on chess.com. Now, this was actually part of a tournament. It wasn't an online tournament, but it was an offline tournament that we played online. So, you had to email the tournament director to register. There was a pairing sheet, which we kept track of on Google Docs. And we were all Zooming each other so we could see each other while we played. And I was a little skeptical of participating in these online tournaments because I'd heard a lot of, stories of people cheating and then they get disqualified afterward. And I didn't want to waste, an $80 entry fee or 2 days of my time just to find out that I'd played against some cheaters. But this tournament actually had no entry fee, which was really nice. So I figured, I have nothing to lose. And also I was just really itching to play some nice, slow classical chess because I hadn't played classical chess in over a year. So this was the round one game. And don't be dissuaded by my opponent's low rating and chess.com profile because he's actually a FIDE Master. His name is Ryan Porter, and he's a FIDE Master. His peak FIDE rating was 2314, and his current FIDE rating is somewhere between 2200 and 2300. I can't remember the exact number, but he's a very strong player. So if I win or draw this game, I would get that result against a FIDE Master, which I would be very happy with. And the time control for this game was G90 with a 5-second delay or 5-second increment. So we both started with 90 minutes, and after every move, we got an additional 5 seconds. Also, you may notice there's something new about the setup, which is I have a new microphone. So let me know how that sounds in the comments. Let me know if it sounds worse or better, or if you think it sounds the same, because that's really helpful for me. Anyway, I had a suspicion that I may have been playing this player before the tournament started, so I was able to look at some of the games he played and prep against him. Though I wasn't sure if I was going to be playing white or black. So if I had gotten the black pieces in this game, I actually would have been able to employ my Vukovic Gambit preparation, which I just made a video about 1 week ago. So you guys can check that out. I'll put it in the little info box. You guys can check that out. But I did get the white pieces, so I was going to be playing against a different opening, which I also prepped against. And let's see how that went. So I played e4, my opponent played d6, I played d4, my opponent played knight f6, and I played knight c3. And this is the Pirc defense, so I was expecting my opponent to play this. And here my opponent played c6, which is a sideline variation of the Pirc, known as the Czech Pirc. And basically, this is actually a very strong opening if white is not prepared against it. But luckily, I did have time to prepare against it, so hopefully I can get a good position. I played f4. My opponent played queen a5, and those are both mainline moves. And then here I played e5, which is sort of a sideline move, but it's still a known move. So my opponent played knight e4, which is the best move. And here I played another sideline move. So here the main move is bishop d2, but instead I played queen f3, which is kind of another sideline move. And here I'm just hoping to get my opponent into an unfamiliar position, one that he's not used to playing very much. So my opponent played f5, and I played e cross f6. My opponent played knight cross f6, and here I played bishop d2. And this was all prepped by me. And here I had prepped against the moves knight a6 and also bishop g4, but my opponent played neither of these moves. He played bishop f5. So as of this move, I was out of prep, and I kind of fricked it up badly because I actually made a mistake on the very next move, and it's not a small mistake either. It's one that should have been very obvious, and that was castling queenside. And you may see why this is a mistake already. I was really ashamed after I played this move because it's just so obvious why this is not a very good move. And my opponent capitalized it with bishop g4, which obviously is a skewer on the queen and the rook. So I'm going to be losing the exchange here. And I was just so ashamed of myself after I played this move. I don't even know how this happened. In a classical game, I thought, this is all over. I'm going to be an exchange down on move 10 and against a FIDE Master. So I had pretty much thought that I was going to lose this game at this point. But the game wasn't over, so we continued. I played queen e3, and my opponent took my bishop on d1. I recaptured. And here, one of the main ideas of the Czech Pircs is you can't develop your knight to c6, so you develop to a6 first and then reroute it to c7. So that's what my opponent's plan is. He started with knight a6. I played bishop c4, just developing my bishop. my opponent played queen h5 check. So, just gaining a tempo on my queen, and I actually don't know what my opponent's plan with this move is. Maybe he's playing to castle queenside, and then he has the e8 square available for his queen. But here I played king c1, and here you might think, why didn't you play just immediately knight f3? And the reason is, here if I play knight f3, well, first of all, the knight's going to be pinned, and there's no really good way of kicking this queen away from the h5 square. So in order, I'm going to have to spend another move to unpin this knight anyway by playing like king c1 or bishop e2. And the second reason why I didn't want to play knight f3 is in some positions black has this knight g4 move, and I wanted this g3 square available for my queen in case black ever wanted to play knight g4. So those were the two reasons why I didn't want to play knight f3 here. So I played king c1, and my opponent continued with his plan. He played knight c7, and here I played knight a3. So I'm just developing my last piece, and I didn't develop it to f3 for the same reason I didn't develop it to f3 on the last move. Also, it's not, it can't really do anything with these two squares at the moment, and I'm planning to bring it to g5 anyway. So that's the reason I develop it to h3 and not f3, since this might look like kind of a weird move. Anyway, my opponent castled queenside, and I continued with my plan. I played knight g5, just capitalizing on sort of these light squares weaknesses that my opponent has made. So my opponent played d5, and he's just trying to shut down my bishop from controlling those squares. I played bishop e2, so saving my bishop and getting a tempo on black's queen, and my opponent played queen to e8, which is fine. I think queen to g6 would have also been fine, but queen to e8 is also a fine move. And here my opponent's actually threatening e6 to develop this bishop and stop f5 and also close down this diagonal right here. So I don't want my opponent to play e6, so I play f5. And now my opponent can't play this move without losing a pawn, so he doesn't want to do that. But you still have to develop this bishop somehow. And even though I'm down in exchange in this position, I'm still very happy with my position. These two diagonals are very weak, so it's going to take a long time for black's king to get really safe. And my opponent's got a lot of pieces on the back rank still that are not very active, and my pieces are just overall more active than black's pieces. So I'm happy with this position so far. Anyway, my opponent plays g6. I'm happy with this position, especially considering I lost an exchange on move 10. Anyway, my opponent played g6. I played bishop d3, so he was threatening to take this pawn, obviously. And my idea is, now if he takes, I simply recapture with the bishop. It's a check, and also my bishop controls the squares that the pawn used to control. And my opponent's next move kind of surprised me a little bit. Here I was expecting bishop h6 or king b8. I was expecting either of those moves. And bishop h6 just because it develops the bishop, it pins this knight, it aligns the bishop with the king. Or king b8 just because it's a very nice prophylactic move. It gets the king off of this diagonal, which is very weak. This diagonal is not the best either, but it's better than this h3 to c8 diagonal. So I was expecting either of those two moves, but my opponent, he played a different move. He played bishop g7, which I don't think is the best move, because it allows me to play the move that I played next, which is knight to e6. And the idea behind this is, now it's a fork on the rook and the bishop. It wouldn't have been a fork if the bishop was defended on f8. So you have to take this knight. My opponent played knight takes e6, and I played queen takes e6. And here, if you block with a rook, then I can play knight a4, and I have ideas of knight c5. So if you try to if you try to unpin your knight with, say, like king c7, then I still can play knight c5, and this is just a very nice position for white. So that's the idea. If black plays rook d7, and if my opponent plays queen d7, then I can simply trade queens and win this pawn on g6, which I would have been very happy with. And if my opponent played knight to d7, then I can simply play bishop f4, and this cut the king off from here. And I have threats of like bishop a6 and queen c6. Now that the queen and the rook are sort of cut off, the bishop or the king is stuck on c8. So this is a terrible position. This is actually a mate in 3, believe it or not, for white. So knight to d7 would have been a terrible move. So that's why I was surprised when my opponent played this bishop g7 move. But this allowed my plan, so I played knight e6. My opponent played knight takes e6. I played queen takes e6. And my opponent, he didn't want to block with the rook or the queen or the knight for any of those reasons, so he played king b8. And we'll see what happens when the opponent moves his king. What happened in the game was I played rook e1, and now there's just a lot of pressure on this pawn. Once again, if you try to defend with the rook, I can bring my knight to a4 with ideas of knight c5. You can't really play b6 because the c pawn hangs. And the other ways to defend the pawn, other than defending with the rook, you can defend it with the knight, but then you block your rook in. Your knight's not doing anything. Knight to g8 is just not a move you want to play. Or also bishop to f8. It's kind of the same deal. Your bishop's not doing anything. You're blocking your rook. You're blocking your queen. It's not a move that you want to play. So this is what I saw with my plan when I played knight e6. So I continued with my plan. I played rook e1, and my opponent played g takes f5. And I was happy to see this move because here I was also threatening taking this pawn. So if you imagine it's white's move here, I can take this pawn and then take on e7. And then once the queen is removed from the defense of this pawn, I will win another pawn on g6. So I have some ideas of removing the queen's defense and winning another pawn. But anyway, my opponent played g takes f5, and I played bishop takes f5. And here my opponent played knight to e4. And this move surprised me a lot because this just seemed like a free pawn to me. So maybe my opponent sacrificed this pawn to try to activate his pieces, but I can simply trade off all of black's active pieces and win a couple pawns in the end. So I think this was definitely a mistake from my opponent. So I simply played knight takes e4. My opponent had to capture, obviously, and I didn't want to simply defend this pawn right away. So obviously this pawn is attacked twice, so if I want to hang on to it, I have to play c3. So if I grab this pawn right away, for example, I'm just going to lose my d pawn right back, and that won't be good for me. So I wanted to defend this pawn first before I grab it. But if I play c3, I will allow my opponent to play e3, and then I either have to take with the bishop, and this disconnects my queen and my rook, or I have to take with my rook, and it blocks my rook behind my bishop, or my rook blocks my bishop. So I don't want either of those things. So first I play bishop f4 check. My opponent moves his king to a8, and now I can defend my pawn with c3, and I'm going to win this pawn in the next couple moves. My opponent played rook to f8, so he's just trying to get his last piece into the game. And also it's pressuring these two bishops, so it's pinning this f bishop, actually. And here I considered a move which I should have played this move, which is bishop to c7. And here the rook only has one square. The rook has to move to d5. And now I can play g4. And black's pieces are just kind of all trapped. They can't really do anything. So even if black tries like a move like h5 here, I can simply play h3, h takes g4, h takes g4, and like queen f7, for example. And black's pieces are all just kind of tied up, I can simply take this pawn with my rook, and I have this nice passed pawn, passed g pawn, and the bishop pair, which is my main asset for when my opponent took my rook in the opening. My main compensation for that was the bishop pair, so I wanted to try to hang on to the bishop pair throughout the game, and as you can see, they really came alive in this middle game. So that was some nice compensation, I guess you could say, for that early castles queenside blunder. But so yeah, I should have really played this bishop c7 move, but instead I simply took this e pawn with my queen, and now I'm planning I can pick up the other e pawn or the h pawn next. So that was my plan here. So my opponent, he played e6. So now if my bishop is attacked, sorry, now my bishop's attacked, but this is a free pawn. I've got 3 guys on it. So I did take this pawn, and my opponent, he played queen to g6, and I said, okay, I've got a queenside majority, I've got a kingside majority, and I've got the bishop pair, so I could probably draw this endgame pretty easily if I trade queens. So I went for that. I traded queens. He recaptured, and I played bishop g3, so just saving my bishop, defending my pawns, defending my rook from any potential pins. And my opponent played rook e8 anyway. And here I played bishop c4, so bishop g3 on the previous move defended my rook so that I could move my bishop safely. And also, when I move my bishop to c4, it defends this f1 square from any checks from the f rook. So here I was not expecting my opponent to trade, but he did. He played rook takes e1, and I played bishop takes e1. And here my opponent played bishop h6 check, and I played king c2. And I figured I could draw this endgame, and actually I probably have the winning chances in this endgame because I have pawn majorities on both sides, and the bishop pair. The pawn majorities is the main advantage. But my opponent played bishop f4, so I saved my pawn. I played h3, and my opponent played king b8, so he's activating his king in the endgame. And here I just want to play bishop e2 and bishop f3 and hold this structure, keep my king on the queen side to defend my queenside pawns, and I would be very happy with a draw in this endgame. You know, I'm down in exchange, and I'm playing against a FIDE Master, so I would be happy with a draw here. So I played bishop e2 to continue my plan, and I did see this move, rook e8, which is a skewer on the bishop, so here you have to defend your bishops. And here I made a huge blunder, which you should never do in classical chess unless you're very low on time. And I made a move in pretty much immediately. The clock moves down by 1 second, so I don't think I made it in 1 second. I think this is a side effect of the increment, so I think I probably made it in 6 seconds. But 6 seconds is still extremely fast for classical chess, and so this is something you never want to do. So back in this position, after I played h3 and my plan was bishop e2 and bishop f3, I saw this bishop e2. If the rook comes to e1, I can simply move my king up and defend my bishop, and then I can play like bishop d2 next, and then bishop f3, and I'll be fine. And I can hold. So when we had that on board after bishop e2, I did not bother to recheck this calculation, which is a huge mistake when I have 32 minutes left on the clock. And I don't know if it was restlessness or what it was, but I've definitely learned my lesson here. So here I simply have to play king d1 and not king d3 like I played in the game, because if I do play it king d3, here you can pause and try to find a move for black that just wins the game. It's not too hard to find, but you can do that now. The move is rook to e3 check, and there's only one square to move to that continues defending the bishop. and this sets you up for some pretty bad discoveries against the bishop. So my opponent played rook takes h3 check, and here I actually could have saved the game with king to c2, and now if rook comes to e3, I can come back to d1. But I had the old classic double blunder where maybe I just thought the game was over at this point, and I played king d1, which just totally loses the game after rook to h1. And now bishop to g3 is going to come next, and I won't be able to save this bishop. So I tried one last trick. I played bishop to d3, and my hope was that my opponent would see this pawn was under attack and move the pawn, and then I could get out of the pin on my bishop and save my bishop. That was my hope, but my opponent, he's a FIDE master. He knows that winning this bishop is more important than saving the pawn, so he played bishop g3, and here I resigned because I'm just going to be down a rook after this, and there's no chance in trying to draw this. So that's how I choked away a draw against a FIDE master. I was really disappointed because it would have been my first draw against a FIDE master, and I really think that I really could have drawn this position here. It's just with the majority on both sides and so much time left on the clock. So I was really disappointed after this, but I entered the tournament with 3 out of 5. So, and my opponent here, actually, he ended up going on to win the entire tournament. So I think he ended with 4.5 out of 5. Yeah, that was my choke against a FIDE master. I don't think I have anything else to say. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more daily chess videos. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.